Thank you very much. Excellent. Well done. Thanks very much. This afternoon we're going to be talking about body language. Body language in business. We're going to look at the way in which body language works in a business environment. We're going to be looking at all sorts of body language gestures. We're going to be looking at all sorts of ways in which you at work will make that use of that body language. Body language is a very powerful tool indeed. If you could imagine being able to read people's minds in business, you'll understand how much better off you would be if you could just manage that body language. You can read minds. So we're going to look at a variety of different situations which will help you do just that. Before we get into any of that though, I need to ask you a question. How many people in this room are good at body language? How many experts have we got in the room? Any experts? No, good. Good. That means I can say anything I want to say now. But in fact, we are all experts in body language. We're all experts in the use of and understanding of body language. We've all been doing it since before we could talk. We perhaps might not accept our expertise, if you like. We think, oh, it's just for the professionals, but it's just not true. We do know this stuff. And I'm going to raise all sorts of issues today, body language gestures. And as I do that, you will say to yourself, well, I knew that. I recognize that. I've seen that before. So we are experts in body language. It's just a matter of bringing some of those things to the surface. So I'm going to talk about gestures that you use yourself and also gestures that you will see other people use. And by using better body language yourself and understanding other people's body language, we're going to improve the way in which we communicate. Communication is a vitally important part of being in any business anywhere in the world. And there's a Dr. Albert Mehebrian, American doctor, and he reckons that in the communication of attitudes and feelings, we use three things. We use words, like any other communication, of course, we use words. We use tone, and we use our body language. Would anybody like to make a guess as to how important words are in the communication of attitudes and feelings as a percentage? Any guesses here? 30%, 20%, 10% over here. Any other guesses? 5%, very, very close. It's actually 7%. 7% of the communication of attitudes and feelings comes from the words you use, only 7%. 38% comes from your tone, and a massive 55% comes from your body language. 55%. It's huge. Now, look, I really am not keen on leaving statistics without some form of proof. So I'm going to ask somebody in the audience to help me. Simone, would you come and help me with this, please? Thank you very much. Come up here. Just come and stand right there. Thanks very much. Thank you. A little bit closer. Don't be shy. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Now, imagine that I wanted to communicate a strong feeling to Simone here. Let's say, for instance, let's say I've fallen in love with her. Okay. Now, well, that's not surprising, isn't it? She's attractive. I'm impulsive, So now I've fallen in love with her. Now I need to communicate that feeling to her. Now I've got three things I could use. I could use words, or tone, or body language. Now, if I used words on their own, no tone, no body language, just words on their own, comes out like this. I love you. Are you convinced? No, you see, words don't mean very much on their own. If you put words and tone together, it's a little bit different. Words and tone together comes out like this. Still no body language, just words and tone. I love you. How am I doing? Better. Bit better, bit better. Bit better. You see, words and tone work quite well over the telephone. I know I've tried that a few times, works quite well over the phone, but when you're with somebody, face to face with them, it still doesn't communicate that true feeling. Now, when you put body language together with those words and tone, you ready? Okay. When you put body language together with those words and tone, it comes out like this. I love you. How's that? She's convinced, you see. Thanks very much. Give her a round of applause for that. You see, thanks, Simone. You see, the interesting thing is where words and tone have no real meaning on their own, if you apply body language to that, it's an amazingly different response that you get. Because, of course, if you saw somebody down on one knee like that, hand on his heart, palm open, staring into the eyes of a beautiful young lady, you'd know he was in love, wouldn't you? Or in trouble. Probably both. But you see, body language is a hugely powerful communicator. And in fact, there was a billion-dollar industry based purely on our ability to communicate with body language. Anybody know what industry that might have been? No longer with us now. Any guesses? Billion-dollar industry. No guesses? Sorry? Somebody say? No? Silent movies, absolutely right, silent movies. You see, it's a billion-dollar worldwide industry based purely on our ability to communicate with body language. They got through a very clever and complicated stories simply by the use of body language because there was no sound apart from perhaps the pianist playing on the side. So body language is very, very powerful indeed, and we've got to be able to understand it if we're going to communicate well. Now, 20,000 years ago, of course, they didn't have the problems in communication that we have nowadays. You think it would be more complicated, but of course it was very much easier 20,000 years ago. Nowadays, when we communicate in business, every day there seems to be new words that we have to learn. We went through the re-engineering and then downsizing and then right-sizing and then a paradigm shift. We have all sorts of acronyms and jargon like ASPS and SEBs and ROIs and all sorts of other junk. And every day somebody asks themselves, what on earth is he talking about? 20,000 years ago they didn't have problems like that. 20,000 years ago a man could exchange a leg of grizzly bear for a cooking pot, with just nods and grunts. The interesting thing, however, is that we are still using those nods and grunts today. We still are. 20,000 years ago. Cast your minds back, some of you. 20,000. Imagine what it would have been like to try and do business. In fact, we can try it, can't we? Let's see if we can try it. Dave, won't you come and give me a hand with this, please? Imagine, come and stand up on this top here. Imagine you're a caveman, okay? You look like a caveman. Now, how would a caveman stand? How would a caveman stand? Well, use your imagination there, and we'll get somebody else. Nigel, would you come and give me a hand with this, please? Okay, imagine, Nigel, you're a caveman, okay? You're a caveman. You're both cavemen because it's the same era. Okay, you've got to be caveman. Now, how would a caveman stand? Well, guess. How would a caveman stand? Sort of, he's going to be. That's it. That's the sort of thing. Okay, come on. Both of you stand like that, please. Come on. That's right. That's it. Okay. Now. Okay. Now. Well done, fellas. Now, we've got Dave here. Now, Dave is a maker of cooking pots. Okay. Now, well, let's see if we can help him here. Where's my cooking pot? Here. Okay. Dave makes cooking pots. There you go, Dave. Now, Dave makes cooking pots, but he's hungry. Now, Nigel hunts bear. So there's your bear. Nigel's come home with a really big bear. Now, fellas, what I'd like you to do is try to negotiate between yourselves. You've got pots, you've got bears. Obviously, you've got things in common. Negotiate for some exchange here without using words, just nods and grunts. Off you go. Okay, here we go. You're playing hard to get here. Okay, that'll do. Come on, sit down again. Thanks very much. Give them a round of applause for that. Well done, fellas. Oh, sorry. Let's put him in there. We can cook him later. But you see, while Nigel was playing hard to get, they could very easily understand each other if they weren't standing in front of 60 or 70 people. It would have been less embarrassing, but it would have been easy in the end of the day to be able to do that negotiation and come to some sort of solution after a while. But that's because we are still using those nods and grunts. We still know them very well indeed. And while we negotiate in all sorts of other ways, we are still, deep down inside of us, using our body language to negotiate. So if you could just watch, instead of talking, if you could watch and listen to other people's body language, you'd be amazed how much information you can get without having to listen to their words. So body language is a very powerful tool indeed. And what we're going to be doing over the next while or so, I'm going to be talking about various gestures in body language, starting with the head and working down to the feet. And then a little bit later on, we're going to be looking at the sort of body language in action. We're going to be putting together some little stories and showing you how that body language works in business. To start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about the body itself, the various gestures, and I'm going to be demonstrating these so the people in the front row can relax for a while, okay? I'm going to be demonstrating these various gestures too. We're going to start off with the head, and starting with the face, obviously. The first part that we get to are the eyebrows. Now, the eyebrows are a very interesting, they have some very interesting meanings, the eyebrows. And we don't often consider the eyebrows, but they are moving all the time when we're talking. When we meet people, for instance, we flash our eyebrows. We raise our eyebrows like that, a kind of flash gesture like that. And that's very common for all of us when we meet people. It's pretty much opening your eyes a little bit more. It's like saying, I see you. It's a gesture of letting you know that you have seen that person, just flashing the eyebrows. What is interesting is that all primates do this. If you look at monkeys, where if you get to go into the bush, or any other chimpanzees or any other primates, you will see that they also do exactly the same thing. Now, look, I'm not going to get into the argument of where we came from. That's for other issues to be discussed. Whether we came from monkeys or whether we came from other places is not for me to discuss. In fact, my wife reckons we all come from teddy bears. So where she gets that from, I have no idea. But there you go. But for me, there is no doubt that all primates raise their eyebrows. In fact, we have a lot of body languages in common, body language gestures, which gives you some idea how long they've been with us. So there's flashing of the eyebrows. Other eyebrow positions which are interesting. When we are angry, we tend to frown like that. We bring our eyebrows down into the center. So we bring them down. And what we're doing there is protecting our eyes, creating a sort of puffy area around our eyes. When we're angry, just in case we're going to get into a fight. Now, we don't often do that any longer in business. Well, look, sometimes, but not often. But we still, when we're angry, we have the same gesture. We frown like that. When we're surprised, we raise our eyebrows up like that. That's a surprise gesture. When you're not sure, or when you don't believe somebody, you will have one eyebrow up and the other eyebrow down. Have you ever noticed that? Like that sort of gesture. Very strange. It's quite hard to do, to order. But nonetheless, that gesture is quite common as well. Eyebrows up, eyebrows down. All sorts of different eyebrow positions. Coming down the face, there's the nose. Of course, the nose has also some interesting body language gestures incorporated with it. Now, of course, you can't move your nose very much. So there's not much involved there, except when we are trying to find out other people's feelings about a situation. Now, for instance, when we are angry, we want to see if that other person is angry, and nostrils will flare. When we're in love, and we want to see if that other person is also feeling as strongly as we feel, and nostrils will flare just a little bit. Now, the reason for that is very simple if you think it through. Years ago, before perfumes and deodorants, we used to leave our body odors as they were, but what was interesting about that was that they would change. Our body odor changes depending on how we're feeling right now. If we're angry, it'll be different than if we're in love. So what the nose flaring tends to be making your nose bigger just to take in more smells. So that's where that gesture comes from. There's pretty much not much else you can do with the nose except, and this is quite interesting, has anybody ever heard the old wives' tale, which suggests that when you're about to have a fight, you scratch your nose? You ever heard of that? Okay, now that has got some element of truth in it, interestingly enough. Because when you are angry, there's 4 or 5 nerve endings on the side of your nose here, and they tend to tingle when you're angry. So you're quite likely to scratch the side of your nose like that when you are angry, which is quite interesting because that's what's led to the old wives' tale. So if you're talking to your boss and he or she is just doing this, it's time to back away. Okay, I'll see you later, boss. Okay, you just want to back away from that argument just a little bit. Have you noticed boxers, when they're boxing, will brush their nose a little bit because they're trying to wind themselves up there? But that's the same. It's the anger that they're trying to develop with the tingling of those nerve endings on the side of the nose. So that's the nose pretty much. There's one other thing. There's a part of the body, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a part of the body which grows up to 4 times its normal size when you're looking at something you really like the look of or are very excited, and shrinks when you're looking at something you don't like the look of or are not very excited. Anybody know what part of the body that might be? Your pupil, thank you very much, your pupil, absolutely right. I don't know what this lot were laughing at over here, I really don't know. Shame on. In fact, a few weeks ago I raised the same issue with a group and somebody said, only 4 times, shame. But your pupil, it's a lovely colour red, that's very nice. Now, your pupil will grow up to 4 times its normal size when you're looking at something you really like the look of, and shrink when you're looking at something you don't like the look of. How many people actually knew that? Show of hands, how many people knew that? There's 1 or 2 of you answered the question, so some people, 1 here? Only 1? 2? Okay. Actually not many, normally get a bit more than that. But in fact, we all know that. We do. We all know that because when you're talking to somebody and they won't look you in the eye when they're talking to you, how do you feel about them? How do you feel about them? You don't trust them, do you? A bit shifty, aren't they? Well, in fact, what's happening is they are hiding their pupils from you because they know subconsciously that pupils will let you know how they're feeling right now. And we know subconsciously to look people in the eyes when we're talking to them to let them know how we're feeling and to check out how they're feeling. That's what we're doing, and that's all to do with pupil size. So pupil size is very important to us human beings. Then when we talk to people, we look into their eyes, we check their pupils out. Look, if you don't believe me, well, this is a very interesting way you can test this out. When you go home tonight, okay, you get your children to one side. And look, if you don't have any children, borrow some on the way home, okay? So you get your children to one side and you show them 4 photographs. Now, the first 3 photographs have got to be things that the children don't like the look of. Perhaps a photograph of cabbage, it's quite a good one, or a photograph of their school, you know, or a photograph of Auntie Mabel, you know, the one with the beard, you know. So first 3 photographs the children don't like the look of. The 4th photograph's got to be ice cream, because universally all children like ice cream. Now, turn the photographs face down, and then you turn the photographs that they don't like up one at a time, and while they're looking at the photographs, you look at their pupils. As you look at their pupils, as they're looking at things they don't like, their pupils will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then if you turn up a photograph of ice cream, their pupils will dramatically get bigger. It's a very quick, very easy to see movement. Now, it's much easier to see in children than it is in adults, but it's exactly the same with adults. And it's a fascinating thing because lots of disciplines use this to their advantage. In the advertising industry, for instance, if somebody's liking or meant to like the thing they're looking at, then their pupils will be artificially enhanced to be bigger. And we pick that up subconsciously, but we know that they're enjoying looking at what they're looking at because their pupils are bigger. We pick it up subconsciously. Have you ever noticed with children's pictures, art, if you buy a picture of a child's painting, they will have very big pupils. Have you noticed that? It encourages us to want to protect them. Big pupils makes us feel good. And that's why children have big pupils. It encourages us to want to protect the children as well. In card playing, if you... excuse me, I don't know how many card players we have in the room, but if you play cards, the next time all the cards are dealt out, don't pick up your hand. Okay, you leave it on the table, let everybody else pick up their hand. And while they're looking at their cards, you look at their pupils. If they've got a good hand, they'll have big pupils. If they've got a bad hand, they'll have small pupils. You know, if they've all got big pupils, you chuck your cards in. Now, misdeal, we don't want to play that hand. Because they've all got good hands, you don't want that. So pupil size is very important to us. When we're talking to people, we always look into their eyes. Have you ever noticed sometimes when people are lying, they'll rub their eyes? Have you noticed that? They'll say, I promise, the check's in the post, I promise. They'll be rubbing their eyes when they're lying to you. It's a lie indicator. Watch for that. It's hiding their pupils. So pupil size is important. When you're meeting people, get eye contact with people when you meet them. It's very important to get eye contact. Now, of course, this raises some interesting cultural differences. Because, you know, for a black South African, it's quite different than it is for a white South African. Traditionally, anyway, it's changing somewhat now. But for a white South African, it's the polite thing to do to look in a senior person's eyes when you're talking to them. But for a black South African, it's impolite to look in their eyes. And culturally, or traditionally at least, a black South African would have been taught to look away when they're talking to a senior person, rather than looking in your eyes. Now, of course, it's different now because body language is dynamic, it's changing all the time. But you will still quite often see, particularly if you go into the country, you'll see when you're talking to a black South African, they will tend to look away if they're talking to somebody that they consider to be their senior. Now, of course, this over the years has raised some interesting problems for us here in South Africa. Because for a white South African, if they don't look you in the eyes, that you will consider that they can't be trusted. But for a black South African, that's the polite thing to do. No wonder we've had problems over the years. No wonder. My black friends tell me that it's quite different now. In business, they would tend to look into the eyes of their boss when they are talking to their boss, because that's the right thing to do at work. But particularly the older ones would say that they probably wouldn't look into the eyes of their father, because that would be impolite now. So things are different. Things are different. That's the way the world works. But that pupil size works for all cultures. As our eyes do get bigger and smaller, we just have different ways of managing that size. So the eyes are a very important part of body language. You need to get eye contact and keep eye contact. You know, when you meet people, there's all sorts of body language gestures that mean different things, and that's true of the eyes as well. When we look into people's eyes, we have different gaze types. For instance, if you're going to have a business relationship with somebody, you will tend to look into their pupils, but then your gaze will tend to break up. You don't look into the pupils for 100% of the time. We know that. That would be uncomfortable, that would be staring, and we don't stare straight into people's eyes. Well, there are two types of people who do stare. That's lovers and haters. And that's the only two types who would stare into your eyes. The difference there between lovers and haters would be the size of their pupils, of course. But that's something different. No, it's true. But with gaze types, there are three different gaze types. If you're having a business relationship, you tend to look into the eyes, and then your gaze breaks up to around here, the forehead. Two eyes, then up to the forehead. If you're looking at, if you're having a social relationship with somebody, it tends to be a little bit different. The gaze breaks down to the two eyes and then down to the chin area in a kind of a triangle in that sort of area of the face. You only actually look into the eyes about 20% of the time. The rest of it, you're looking around the face either up or down. Now, I tend to get more business done if I'm having a social relationship with somebody. So what I tend to do is force my gaze to break down rather than breaking up. And in that way, it's going to lighten the relationship I'm having with that person considerably, which tends, for me in any event, to get more business. The third type of gaze is the intimate gaze, which is quite different. That looks into the two eyes and then down to this sort of area here, but we don't talk about that here. We don't need to worry too much about that, because that stuff never happens in business, does it? Well, not in my business anyway. So the eyes are very important communicators. All sorts of different gaze types there will help you communicate better. Continuing down the face, we've looked at the eyes. The next is the mouth. Now the mouth has, again, different positions. Up, with the lips up, tends to be smiling. With the lips down, tends to be very sad. Now we know that if you draw a smiley face with the lips down, we all know that that's a sad face, and with the lips up, we all know that's a smiley face. But in fact, when you're smiling, lots of different things happen on your face when you smile. I had a colleague years ago. In fact, he was my boss, and I was the sales director, he was managing director, and we used to travel around the country quite a lot and have our photographs taken in all sorts of different environments. And every time the cameras came out, we used to smile, but my colleague, my boss's smile was a very strange smile. When he smiled, his lips went up, but nothing else happened on his face. I don't know how he does it. I couldn't do it. I tried. I just couldn't do it. So his lips went up, nothing else changed. And, and that just looked ridiculous. And I worked with him for about 5 years, and I thought I should tell him. We were colleagues. I should tell him. So I took him aside one day, and I said to him, "Hey, Alan, that smile, it's more like a snarl than a smile, Look, I didn't work for them long after that. But when you smile, all sorts of different things happen on your face. When you smile, your lips go up, of course, but other things happen. Your eyes get bigger, your pupils get bigger, your eyes glaze over, you get little laugh lines here, then your lips go up, your cheeks go red, then you get two puffy little bags under your eyes. That's it. Just like, watch for the puffy little bags when you smile, okay? Because that's a really big smile. That's what you're looking for. And you must try this. You must develop a really big smile. When you go home tonight, stand in front of the mirror and give it a big smile. Yeah, and look, don't do this in front of the children, okay? They're going to think you're very strange. But if you give it a big smile, that really reflects how you're feeling. Have a look at what your smile looks like in the mirror. And when you start to smile like that, it's fascinating because it kind of develops. You smile at yourself smiling. You must try this because it's really quite fun. And because that's true when you're talking to other people as well. What happens when you smile when you're with somebody? What do? They smile back, don't they? We all know that. They smile back. You smile, they smile. And your smile makes them smile. Now, this is a lovely thing, because the smile is a very powerful thing indeed. The smile makes you feel good. And we've all had this experience. Have you ever been depressed or unhappy or whatever, and you smile, it makes you feel better, doesn't it? It makes you feel better. In fact, biologically what's happening is when we laugh, endorphins are released into the body. Endorphins are the feel-good hormone. And in fact, it really does make you feel good when you laugh, when you smile. So the smile makes you feel good. Think of this for a second. When you smile, it makes you feel good. When you smile, it makes the person you're talking to smile, and if they smile, it makes them feel good. So by you smiling, that makes the person you're talking to feel good, which has got to be a good thing, hasn't it? Particularly if you're with your customer. If you're meeting a customer and you make them feel good before you've done anything else and even said hello, that's got to be good. So the smile is a very powerful thing indeed. Practice that really big, warm, sunny smile, and then use it with your customers and see how easily you get that response, that smiling response back. So the mouth is very important, but it's the whole face that smiles. There's all sorts of other gestures to do with hand and mouth and hand and face as well. We're going to look at a few combinations here because they are quite interesting as well. Imagine you go home tonight and you're sitting in a chair in the lounge, and you hear the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. So you jump up from your chair, you rush into the kitchen, and there, standing there, is your 5-year-old son, looking very angelic, and next to him on the floor is a pile of broken glass. And you say to him, "Did you break that glass?" And he says, "No." Puts a hand over his mouth. Do you recognize that gesture? Very common amongst children, particularly around the ages of 5, both boys and girls. Now, what's happening there is interesting because the boy knows he's not meant to be lying, but he also knows that sometimes when he does lie, he gets away with it. So what happens is the boy's brain is saying, uh-oh, there's a lie coming out, so the hand goes up to cover the mouth to push the lie back in. The lie comes out, the hand comes over a bit late, and that's what ends up with that gesture, hand over the mouth gesture. But you know this, you're good at body language, you know that they're lying. We can always tell when the kids are lying. I know sometimes you let them get away with it because you don't want to face that problem, but you know when they're not telling the truth. Because their body language gestures will let you know. As we get older, our body language develops, it gets more refined, but it still remains pretty much the same, even in a more refined state. So when we're going to lie, we're about to lie, our brain says, uh-oh, there's a lie coming out, so the hand goes up to cover the mouth, then gets deflected and brushes down the side of the face like this, or that's it, under the nose like that. But you know that. That's a dead giveaway for somebody lying. But you know that deep down. Now, you'd never buy a car, for instance, from a man who talked through his hand all the time, would you? You would feel there was something definitely wrong with what he was saying. And that's exactly the same as the 5-year-old slapping the hand over the mouth when they're lying to you. So hand-to-face gestures are often an indication of a lie. There's rubbing the nose like this, brushing down the side of the nose, or the side of the face like this, brushing their hair back. These are all often indications of a lie. Now, we have to be a bit careful here, because there are other hand-to-face gestures which aren't an indication of a lie. For instance, when somebody does this, or this, what is that? It's thinking, absolutely right, it's thinking. So that particular gesture isn't an indication of a lie, it's thinking. We're going to come to that, back to that in a second. So the problem, however, is with body language, just like any other language, it's easily misunderstood. So perhaps when you're talking to somebody and you scratch your nose like that when you're talking, maybe it's just because you've got an itchy nose. It doesn't necessarily mean you're lying to them, but they might misunderstand that gesture as an indication that you are lying to them. So what we've got to learn to do, particularly when you're in important situations, is to keep your hands away from your face. When you're talking to a customer, keep your hands away from the face. When you're talking to your boss or your colleagues, keep your hands away from your face. Because if you touch your face, that may well be misunderstood as a lie indicator. If you watch TV, watch the news on television, or even TV announcers, they are taught from a very early age to keep their hands away from their face. And early on in news broadcasting, they will sit on their hands when they're learning, in order to avoid that temptation to touch their face with the hands as they're talking, because it's quite a common temptation, but you've got to keep your hands away from your face. We can learn from those newscasters. We do the same things. Keep our hands away from their face when we're talking to people. So that particular hand-to-face gesture is interesting. This one we talked about is thinking. Now, when somebody's stroking their chin, they call it beard stroking, but both men and women do that when they're thinking. Now, what is interesting here, look, just because we know they're thinking, that doesn't help us very much, but it would be really cool if we knew what they were thinking. And you can by looking at the other positions of their head and their hands. If, for instance, they are thinking negatively, when they're stroking their chin, they will tend to look straight down, like this. That would be negative thinking, straight down, or straight up would be negative thinking, although straight down is more common as a negative thought pattern. So if they're stroking their chin, looking straight down, they're thinking negatively. If you're talking to a customer who's stroking his chin and looking straight down, interrupt his thinking. You don't want him to think negatively. You want him to be thinking positively. So interrupt that thought pattern. If, on the other hand, he's stroking his chin and looking to one side, like that, that would be a positive thought pattern. Up to one side or the other tends to be positive thinking. Now, if your customer's thinking positively, let him continue to think positively, because he's going to come to a positive conclusion. And if he comes to a positive conclusion, he'll change his body language and look at you probably. So it'll be like that, he's thinking, And then he might look at you, maybe even point. That means he's come to a positive conclusion. And of course, if you're selling, if you're a salesman and he's come to a positive conclusion, that's a buying signal. Now's the time to close the sale. So that thinking pattern, stroking the chin, is very important. If you know exactly what they're thinking, that's very helpful indeed. Other positions of the head on its own. What does it mean when people do this? They're thinking yes. Doesn't matter what they say, however. If they're nodding their head, they're thinking yes. Sometimes people will nod their head and say negative things. Have you noticed? Sometimes they'll say, oh, you know, that's awfully expensive, don't you? But if he's nodding, ignore the it's awfully expensive. Just ignore that. He's nodding, he wants one. And all he's trying to do is push the price down a little bit, but he's nodding, he wants it. Now, when they're shaking their head like this, what does that mean? It means no. It doesn't matter what they're thinking, it means no. Sometimes you'll hear people say, it doesn't matter what they're saying, I beg your pardon, it means no. Sometimes you'll hear people saying positive things when they shake their head. So I fell into this trap some years ago. When I wrote my book on body language, I gave it to my wife to read, to proofread. Now, she always proofreads my books. Look, I have editors as well, but I bring her into the whole company thing by proofreading my books, and it's very valuable too. And so she'd read through this book, and then the following weekend, we were going to go away for the weekend. It was our anniversary. I like to take her away on our anniversary if I can. And so we were going to go away for the weekend, and she'd bought a new outfit to go away with, and she was wearing this outfit in the bedroom, pacing up and down, spinning around, and she said, "What do you think, darling, about my new outfit?" And I was looking at this, and I said, "Oh, that's a lovely dress, darling. It's really nice." She said, "You're shaking your head," she said. The next day, it went straight back. She got another one. But you see, there is a moral in there somewhere. I'm not sure what it is. But my worst, and ladies, we've got a lot of ladies in the room, so I've got to be a bit careful now. But my worst is when she brings out two dresses, and she said, "Which one should I wear tonight?" Doesn't matter what you say, you're in trouble. You're absolutely, oh, the blue one's nice. Well, what's wrong with the red one? You think it makes me look fat, don't you? You've never liked the red one, you know. You can't win, actually. It doesn't matter what you say. The best thing you can say, fellas, the best thing you can say is, "Which one would you like to wear, darling?" And hope you get away with it. Otherwise, you haven't got a chance. Sorry, I'm getting away from the point a bit here. Anyway, so that position, nodding or shaking the head, watch the body language because it's more powerful, and it often is. Body language is much more powerful meanings than the words people are using. Trust the body language before you trust what they're saying. People lie with words much easier than they can lie with their body language. So that's the nod and the shake of the head. Other body language to think about. The palms are also very powerful communicators. We use a lot of palm gestures when we're talking because it's powerful. Palms flat like that. This is a very submissive way to have the palms. We see this at traffic lights quite a bit, don't we? You know, "Please, can I have something?" Palms down, that's more domineering way to have your palms. This would be the managing director. "No more salary increases, that's it." Palms down, domineering. Palms up, more warm and friendly. And when you're talking to people, you should use palm up gestures, because palm open gestures are much more warm and friendly. If you use palm down gestures, you will tend to dominate the meeting, the people you're meeting with. And you will do that instinctively if you want to dominate. Much better to use palm open gestures. You'll find speakers do this, have palm open gestures when they're talking. Politicians do this. They walk around like this for 4 months, just before elections. Have you noticed? Straight after the election, they do this for 4 years, you know, because they don't need your vote any longer. Then out pop the palms again when they need you, you know. So palm open gestures are a powerful gesture. And actually this comes from our ancestors 20,000 years ago. We had a couple of the ancestors up here earlier on, but 20,000 years ago, palm showing would be very much more powerful. Our ancestors would look at that for that all the time. In fact, if you can imagine a caveman sitting in a cave, and a stranger comes to the entrance of his cave. Now, the caveman would need to know whether he could trust the stranger. So the first thing the caveman would look for would be the palms of the stranger's hands. Because if the stranger was carrying a weapon, a stone or a stick or something, it would be concealed in his palms, or maybe even behind his back. But if the palms were on show, then the stranger would be trusted. And that gesture, that palm showing as a gesture of trust, has remained with us for 20,000 years or more. Because let's imagine you go somewhere and you see a friend over the other side of the street, what would you do? What would you use? You'd show your palm at them, wouldn't you? You'd wave. You'd show your palm. And what you're doing by showing your palm is saying, here, you can trust me, I'm not carrying a weapon. That's what you're saying. You're showing your palms. If you go to court anywhere in the world, look, I've never been to court, of course, but if you go to court, traditionally, one palm on the Bible, show the other palm of the hand to show you could be trusted. So palm showing is a gesture of trust. And when we meet people, we should contrive to show the palms of our hands because that is a gesture of trust. Fellas, don't walk into a meeting with your hands in your pockets because by doing that, you're limiting your ability to communicate because your palms are powerful communicators, and you probably are not going to be so easily trusted by the person you're with. People who have their palms on show, hands out of the pocket, are much more likely to be trusted. This is both men and women. So palm showing is a gesture of trust. And of course, if we can get trusted early on in a meeting, that's very powerful indeed. And those first three things that we've looked at, I call ESP of meeting people, the ESP of meeting people. E, that's eye contact. S for smile. P for show the palms of your hands. When you meet people, remember ESP, eye contact, smile, and show the palms of your hands. And in that way, you'll get across the message that you're warm and friendly, you've got nothing to hide, and you can easily be trusted. Now, that is very powerful if you can do that in the first few seconds of a meeting. Very powerful indeed. So, your palms are powerful communicators. Couple of other hand gestures which are quite interesting that I can actually put a date on one of these as to where it comes from. And that's this particular gesture here. Control yourself, sir. We'll come to the other one in a second. Okay. This gesture here, what does this mean? Peace, or in fact victory. Its first meaning was victory. And then peace, of course, because peace came after victory. And this comes from the Second World War. And you'd often see Winston Churchill using this gesture, but he didn't start it. In fact, it was started in Belgium. When the Germans invaded Belgium, the king of Belgium at the time went onto the radio. It was in November, I think, 1939. He went on the radio and suggested that in order to show solidarity in Belgium, everybody should use that V sign for victory over the Germans. And that's going back, how many years now? 40, 50 years, 60 years. 60 years, a little bit more. But so that gesture is quite a new one. That one for peace is quite a new gesture. This one, on the other hand, is quite a bit different. This gesture, I also know its origins. It's quite a bit different. What does this mean? No, don't worry. Don't. But this particular gesture is also fascinating, and it comes from English history, going back to the 11th century, when the French, who were Normans, invaded the British, who were Saxons. And so the Normans invaded the Saxons. It must have been very awkward all being called Norman, mustn't it? Anyway, most confusing. Anyway, they invaded the south coast of England. And they threatened every time they caught an archer, an English archer, a Saxon archer, they would cut off these two fingers from the Saxon archer, because the archers in those days were paid, and if they cut those two fingers off, then that person could no longer earn a living because he couldn't pull the bow back. So this was a big threat the Normans made, hoping that the Saxons would then run away, and of course I expect some of them did. But the rest that stayed behind, as the Normans were advancing, the rest waved their fingers, the two fingers at the advancing Normans, in a gesture of abuse. And that gesture of abuse has remained with us and means all sorts of other different things nowadays. But that's where it comes from, which is really fascinating. It doesn't help you very much in business, but it's likely to get you a free drink or two in the pub after business, which has got to be worthwhile. Okay, other hand gestures. When you're talking to people, people tend to rub their hands when something good's happening. You notice that? When something's good happening. What is really interesting is the speed that people rub their hands. If they're rubbing their hands quickly, like that, that means there's something good happening to everybody. This is really good for everybody. If they're rubbing their hands slowly like that, that means it's pretty good for me, but not so good for you. And there's a big difference there. It's really lovely to watch people because you can get the feeling of the way in which they're thinking. If you know what people are thinking, it's going to make your life so much easier in business, particularly in negotiation. You know, in negotiation, many of us negotiate. I teach negotiation skills. But in the really big negotiations, the negotiators will take with them a body language expert, because it's not what people say that matters, it's what they're thinking about that truly matters. And if you can use your body language or understanding of body language to see what people are thinking, your negotiations are going to go much better than they have done in the past. Other hand gestures that we use quite a bit is the handshake, of course, and there are all sorts of different handshakes. Warren, can I borrow you here? Shake my hand? Thanks very much. Now drag you up here. Okay, good. Okay. Now when Warren and I shake hands, let go now. Yeah, thank you. Hold your hand like that's it. See, Warren has got this good vertical handshake. When we shake hands, vertical, firm, vertical, firm. I'll come back to that in a second. Vertical, firm handshake. And what we're saying here is that we feel warm and friendly in each other's company. It's a good handshake, an equal handshake. Okay, okay. So there's all sorts of different types of handshake, however, that you've got to be a bit careful of. That firm vertical handshake is the best way to shake hands. Just like my dad taught me, straight up and down with a firm grip, son. And that's the way in which I shake hands. But you know, there are some different types of handshakes you've got to watch out for. One particular one is the palm down handshake. You ever come across a palm down handshake? They're very uncomfortable. If you shake my hand here, how does that feel?
Uncomfortable.
You don't like that, do you? It's uncomfortable. What do you want to do with it? Twist it straight. Absolutely right. You want to twist it straight. The problem with a palm down handshake is this. You remember earlier on I said palms down was domineering. And so if I'm going to shake Warren's hands like that, my palm is domineering, his palm is up, which is submissive. So shaking my hand like that, he's feeling now submissive, and I'm feeling dominant. And of course you don't want to allow somebody to dominate you at the beginning of a meeting, because come time later on to discuss price or something, that domination will carry on. And you want to get rid of that domination if you can. So what do you feel like doing? Twisting it straight. Okay, twist it straight when you're ready. Go on, twist it straight. Go on, you can do better than that. The problem is, now he's obviously, Warren's a lot younger than I am and probably a lot fitter. The problem, however, is if you put your arm out like that, all the muscles here are in a row, which makes it very strong. If it's like that, hold your hand out like this, flat out. Feel your muscles up here. They're all twisted, aren't they? And of course, you've lost all of your strength when your hand's like that. And those of you who have met domineering handshakes, they're very difficult to twist straight. Look, in any event, you don't want to be arm wrestling with your customers before you do business with them. So you want to find some way of taking the sting out of that domineering handshake without having to twist it straight, and there are a couple of things you can do. Put your hand out with a domineering handshake. If I was to meet Warren and he had a handshake like this, I would take his hand and then walk a little bit closer towards him than I normally would. You see what happens? The hand straightens up almost automatically, because he's now thinking in that case of backing away, or what normally would happen, he would bend his arm a little bit, and the arm would go like that and automatically go straight. So what we've ended up by ending up with a straight handshake, because I've encroached on his personal territory just a little bit and level the playing field without having to twist his hand straight. A couple of other ways you can use to manage that palm down handshake that I've been shown at my seminars. People often come and share with me things that they do. So put the palm down handshake again. You can just take the fingers like that. Now, I'm not recommending that one, by the way. You end up with some very strange friends like that. Or put it out again. Or you could take the hand like that and put a hand on top like that. That would be then palm down on top of Warren's palm down, and of course, then that takes the sting out of that palm down handshake. One last way you can manage that, put it out again, is just to take the top. Hello, Warren, how are you? Stay where you are. Again, I'm not recommending that one either. It's just a bit of fun. The best way to manage a palm down handshake is you avoid it. And you avoid it by having your hand out first. So as you're walking up to somebody to meet them, have your hand out a little bit earlier than you normally would, and they have then got to take your vertical hand rather than you taking their palm down hand. And it gets rid of it altogether. You avoided the problem without having to do any fancy tricks. A couple of other handshakes I'm going to share with you. Come stand this side so they can see it. One of them, take my hand, is the double handshake. Now this adds warmth and friendliness to the handshake. You'll find American politicians do this all of the time. You see them on TV? Shaking hands like this, because they're really trying to get across that they're really wonderful people and it's great to see you again, Warren, and all this stuff. You know, makes them feel good. And if you want to add more emphasis to that handshake, you can go up here or up here as you're shaking people's hands. This is the closest you can get to a hug with another man that you don't really know very well indeed. And Warren, I think you're a great guy, but I don't know you that well. Okay, so that adds a little emphasis, a little warmth. Warren, you can take a seat. Thanks very much. Take a seat. Give him a round of applause for that. Thank you, Warren. There's all sorts of different handshakes. Handshakes are wonderful things. You've got to shake hands with everybody. I think it's great to shake hands. I am a hugger. I prefer to hug myself. I really do. But you can't get away with hugs in business so much, but you can get away with shaking people's hands. Now, when you're shaking ladies' hands, however, it's a little different to shaking a man's hand. Now, men have been shaking hands for 200 or 300 years. No more than that, in fact. It was a couple of hundred years ago men started to shake hands when they met. Before that, men used to shake hands only to secure a contract. That would be when they shook hands. Have you ever heard the expression, let's shake on it? That's what it was all about. A handshake was securing a contract, not a greeting as such. And then it began to develop as a greeting, so men have been shaking hands for perhaps 200 years. Women, on the other hand, have only really been shaking hands for the last 20 years, pretty much as a convention. And of course, there is still some uncertainty when you meet a woman as to whether she wants to shake your hand or not, or whether she's comfortable with it. And you know what happens? You meet a woman, you walk towards a woman, you want to shake her hand, so you put your hand out to be shaken. And then she's not comfortable with it, so you take your hand away. And now you think, oh, I've embarrassed her, so you take your hand away. As you take your hand away, out pops her hand, you know. And then you go to grab it and it's gone again, you know. And you end up playing trains for a while here, you know. Which is very, very awkward. The problem is you never know whether she's a shaker or not, do you? I mean, how can you tell? They don't wear T-shirts saying, I am a shaker, you know. So how can you tell? And it makes life very, very difficult. So for me, I love to shake everybody's hand. So what I suggest you do is when you meet somebody, you put your hand out and leave it there. Somebody's going to shake it. Hopefully the person you meet, but somebody will. Don't stir until shaken. Remember that one. Okay, the other thing about shaking ladies' hands, and I need a lady. Would you like to come up and help me with this, please, Yvette? Thanks very much. Come and stand over here. Thank you. Now, if I'm going to come a little bit closer, don't worry, okay. If I'm going to shake Yvette's hand, I would shake her hand like that, okay? That, fellas, can you see that? Firm, vertical grip, not too firm, just exactly the same way as you shake a lady's hand. Do not shake hands here. This is not the way to shake ladies' hands. Ladies almost exclusively do not like this. Okay, lots of nods from the ladies in the room. A couple of reasons why they don't like it. It feels a bit wishy-washy, as opposed to here, which is a good firm. There's a lot more feeling in that. The other thing is ladies often wear rings on the fingers here, and if you take their hand there, then that can be quite uncomfortable, squeezing the fingers. If I was to squeeze your fingers now, which of course I wouldn't dream of doing, but if I was to, that would be quite painful. Okay, Yvette, you may take a seat now. Give her a round of applause for being up here with us. Thank you. The other thing which ladies hate with an absolute passion is when men over-squeeze their hands. And I think this is particularly despicable. Some men will over-squeeze a lady's hand where they wouldn't dream of doing the same to other men, which is a very silly thing. Ladies, the reason for that is because that man is feeling a little bit insecure right now, and he kind of overcompensates by over-squeezing your hand to kind of dominate you. And what you've got to do, if a man over-squeezes your hand, you've just got to tell him that you understand. He's feeling a bit insecure, you know. Or you could kick him in the shins. That also is quite effective. However you choose to do it, but do not just put up with that handshake. Okay, don't just put up with it, because if you do, you'll keep getting it, and men need to be told. Fellows, don't over-squeeze a lady's hand. Not very nice at all. One other type of handshake I want to share with you is a black African handshake, which is a little bit different to a white South African. Sir, can I borrow you for this one, please? Thanks. What's your first name? Cesar. Cesar, okay. If I was to shake Cesar's hand, we would shake pretty much like this, this, and that. Now, that would be a different type of handshake altogether. And there's a couple of really nice things about that handshake which I really like. The first one is that you can't do it like this or like that. So there's no submission in it. It's a very equal handshake. We're going to shake our hands like that. It would be very equal handshake. We'd feel equal like that, wouldn't we? And so it's really nice. The other thing is, when you're shaking hands like that, it's quite acceptable to continue holding hands after you finish the handshake, isn't it? It's quite acceptable. We could still be holding hands up here, chatting, which adds to the familiarity, the informality of it, and creates closer relationships. Now, if I was to continue holding hands with my white friends after we've shaken hands, I'd probably get a punch on the nose. But with black people that you shake hands with, my black friends, you can shake hands with and hold hands afterwards and continue to talk. Thanks very much, Cesar. Take a seat. Give him a round of applause for that. Thank you. That particular handshake is lovely, and it's all over Africa, right from just under the Sahara, all the way through to all the way down here where we are. So it's exactly the same handshake, except there's all sorts of little differences. There's all sorts of clicks and little fingers out and slaps when it's finished, all sorts of lovely things. I've traveled all the way through Africa in these various different countries. All have different endings and beginnings to it, but it's basically the same handshake. And it's such fun. When you're meeting somebody, it doesn't matter who they are you're meeting, use their cultural handshake. If you're meeting an Indian, for instance, Indian handshakes tend to be softer than white South African handshakes. Now, please don't get confused here. This is not a reflection of a softer personality, I can assure you. It is simply a matter of different cultural handshakes. So if you're a white South African meeting an Indian, tend to reflect their comfort zone in the handshake. If you're a white South African meeting a black South African, reflect their handshake. And all true for all sorts of different cultures. It just gives you, it makes it get closer, and that's what the handshake's all about. Just to give us a little bit warmth, a little bit closer. So handshaking, very powerful thing to do. Do not avoid the handshake. Okay, where are we now? A couple of other pieces of body language gestures I need to share with you. The next one is arms folding. Generally, it's a defensive gesture. It's a defensive gesture. There's all sorts of different types of arm fold. This is the most common one, is your arms folded as a defensive gesture. And when you're meeting with your customers or when you're meeting with people, you don't want to be folding your arms because they're going to read into that you're being defensive. Now, I often get arms folded, particularly in the front row of my seminars. Because I noticed as soon as I talked about arms folding, everybody unfolded their arms in the front row. I don't want to be picked on here, they say. But often, you know, if I'd asked any one of them why have they got their arms folded, they would have said, because I'm comfortable with my arms folded. And the reason for that is very simple. You know, when you're sitting in the front row of a seminar, you're feeling a little bit exposed, which is why the front row always fills up last, because you're feeling a little bit exposed. And so the brain says, whoa, we're feeling a little bit exposed here, sends a message down to the body folds the arms and says, not to worry, we're protected now, sends a message back up to the brain, and so your brain and your body are now in sync, working together. No wonder it's comfortable. But if you think about it, with your arms folded, that's not likely to be comfortable, is it? I mean, it's more likely, all tied up in a knot, you're more likely to be comfortable loose. But of course, that's not comfortable because it's not reflecting the way in which you're feeling. And that's why body language is so powerful. Your body language reflects how you feel almost all of the time. And if you can read into that, if you can read other people's body language, you're reading how they're feeling right now. And that's why it's so powerful. So just be careful in any event. Keep your arms unfolded when you're face-to-face with people. You'll find that when people often behind a counter I haven't got a counter here, but if you can imagine I was behind this table talking to a customer, I would be behind the counter. And then I would probably be happy to be behind the counter. As I walked away from the counter into the front of the customer, I've often seen this. People then fold their arms because they're now face to face with the customer, feel uncomfortable. If they were to walk back behind the counter, they would unfold their arms again because the counter's between them and the people they're talking to. If you're ever speaking in public, keep your arms unfolded. You know, lots of people like to speak behind a lectern or a stand or a table because they'll feel more protected in that way, but that's bad. The best position to speak is open up, open yourself up. People have got to buy you. If you're a speaker, they've got to buy you first. And if you're behind a table, behind a lectern, behind a microphone even, they're less likely to buy you. And if they don't buy you, they don't buy what you're saying. So stand open in front of everybody, wide open gestures like that rather than arm folded gestures, much more likely to get the message across. Somebody a little bit earlier on wanted me to talk about the arm folding. He mentioned this. He said, what is it when people do this, hold their hands in front of them when they're talking? Now this would be a semi-arm fold. So semi-arm fold is like an arm fold, but it's kind of half an arm fold. Same sort of thing. People do this. They also hold a glass in two hands at parties. Have you noticed that? People hold glass in parties with two hands. It's a defensive gesture. People sometimes play with their cufflinks. You'll find where I come from in the UK, Prince Charles, if he was, he's not a very outgoing man, although of course he should be. And when he's in crowds of people, he will tend to play with his cufflinks all the time. And that's a semi-arm fold. So that's just closing himself off a little bit in that way. There's all sorts of different other leg crossing positions. The arms crossed and the legs crossed kind of work closely together. Leg crossing is still a defensive position as well. And have you ever noticed at parties, if you go to a party where people don't know each other, at the beginning of the party, have you ever noticed people stand around like this at the beginning of the party? Have you ever tried to party like this? It's not possible. You can't party like this. First the legs come uncrossed, then the arms come uncrossed, then you can party. But you can't otherwise because you're closing yourself in, you're holding yourself back in that way. Open your arms, you're demonstrating your feelings, and in that way you're much more likely to get those messages across that you want. You know, the legs crossing, I need to chair here. Sitting positions, there's one or two quite interesting sitting positions as well. If you want somebody to be attentive when they're sitting, they will tend to be sitting like this, in a 90-degree angle right into the back of the chair. They tend to be very attentive when they're sitting like this. Sometimes, however, people slip down the chair. I'm going to move this back a bit, so I'm going to slip off the stage here. But when you're losing them, they will tend to slip down the chair like this, lower and lower. You ever seen a customer doing this? You've lost them now. You're never going to make it now. You need them sitting right back in their chair like that, upright in their chair like that. There are other positions, though, which are quite interesting. If they have been sitting like that, and then they suddenly lean forward in their chair like this, then that would be an indication that they're very interested now. It might even be a buying signal for those salespeople in the room. Yeah, I'm interested, I'm keen. But be careful. If they slip forward and put their hands on their knees like this is more likely a gesture of them saying, I've had enough now, it's time to go. So there are subtle differences here to watch for. So other gestures, the sitting gestures that you might consider are the legs crossed. When in this country, when men cross their legs, they're probably going to cross their legs like that. That would be a traditional way to cross their legs. But if they cross their legs like that, like this in America, that would be considered to be very effeminate. This close leg cross would be very effeminate in America. In America, men cross their legs like that. Much more open. Now, this is called a figure 4 leg cross. And if they have the figure 4 leg cross like this, with a grip here on the ankle, or even two grips here on the ankle, this would be when they are intransigent. They have a strong opinion, and you're not likely to change that opinion. Now, you need to break that body language gesture if you can. You want them to uncross their legs, ideally, and you're going to have to break the gesture before you can change their minds. The good way is just ask if you can get a glass of water or something, just to break the gesture. So you don't want people to sit like that. Ladies, when they are sitting with of course, where, traditionally, ladies are taught to keep their knees together when they're sitting. That would be very polite. Very Victorian, of course, but still, nonetheless, even nowadays, that's the way they're taught. So ladies are much more likely to sit with their legs tightly crossed in that way. Now, the interesting thing about ladies are, however, they've got some very interesting leg crosses. Have you noticed? Some ladies get their legs all wound up in all sorts of different positions, right underneath here, tucked in underneath. Or you often see ladies sitting, I don't know if I can do this, right? Sitting on one foot like this with a knee pointing off in one direction. How on earth this can possibly be comfortable is way beyond me. But what is interesting is that the more they're wound up in that way, tightly wound up, it's more defensive or uncomfortable they're feeling, and they're pulling themselves in tightly to themselves in that way. So we've got all sorts of body language gestures. Couple more before we start to talk about body language in action. Let me move that chair out of the way. You know, sometimes when you're with a group of people, have you ever noticed that people mimic each other's body language sometimes? Have you noticed that? You'll notice it in your meetings sometimes, where people mimic the same gestures. So perhaps in a meeting where and it really happens where two things are in place. Firstly, when everybody's feeling warm and friendly about each other in the meeting, and secondly, where one person is seen to be the most responsible or the person in charge. And they will start the ball rolling. He or she will cross his or her legs, and then within 4 or 5 minutes, everybody in the room will have their legs crossed. Then he or she will uncross their legs. 4 or 5 minutes later, everybody's got their legs uncrossed. If you haven't noticed this in meetings, it's happening anyway, you just haven't noticed. And body language mimicking is a very powerful thing indeed. In fact, it happens on a one-to-one basis too sometimes. Body language mimicking naturally happens. Have you ever noticed? Let me grab a glass here. Imagine you go and you're having a drink with a friend, fellas, and you've got one hand in your pocket, legs crossed, drink in your hand. This apparently is a traditional way men stand in a bar, so I'm told. Now, have a look and see what your colleague is doing. If you've got a position like that, he will have exactly the same position. And you can have some fun with this, actually. Put your glass down, uncross your legs and put your hands in your pockets. See how quickly he follows suit. Particularly if you've had a few, you know, it happens very quickly indeed. Then you fold your arms, he'll do the same thing. Then you scratch your back of your head like that, he does the same thing. But after a while, because you're unmimicking his body language, he will feel uncomfortable and probably leave quite soon. Because while mimicking is a way to make people feel warm and friendly, unmimicking is a way to get rid of them, because you know you now no longer need them, if you like. So there's mimicking and unmimicking, very powerful indeed. In plenty of other disciplines, they use this mimicking. If you're a psychologist, the psychologists tend to mimic their patients to make them warm and comfortable. In conflict management, if somebody is in conflict with you, you will mimic their body language. So if they're folding their arms like this and angry at you, fold your arms as well, which is interesting. Because what happens is, if you hold your arms folded for about 2 or 3 minutes, you are saying, I empathize with your position. People who are in conflict would naturally have different body language positions. So if you mimic their position, you're empathizing with that. And then what you will do is break your body language, break your arm fold, and they will then follow suit probably. And by doing that, you're taking the sting out of that conflict one way or another. Mimicking is a warm, friendly thing to do. So when you're with people, mimic their body language. And by doing that, you are letting them know that you're warm and friendly in this environment and you respect their point of view, which is not a bad message to get across in the first few seconds of meeting somebody. So body language mimicking, quite powerful. One last thing I want to share with you is the personal territory that we have around us. You know, each of us has a personal kind of bubble around us, a personal zone. And it's different for each person, of course. Mine's about ½ a metre away from me. And I'm a city lad. I was born and brought up in London. So city people tend to have smaller personal territories than country people. If you're from the country, you'll tend to have a larger personal territory. Now, what's interesting about this personal bubble here is everybody's different, but of course when we're meeting people, sometimes you have to act and react a little bit differently because their personal bubble is different. I need somebody to help me with it. Grace, can I borrow you for this one, please? Thank you very much indeed. Come and stand up here. Where are you from? Are you from the city or from the country? Another country. From another country. Which country are you from? Kenya. I love Kenya. I absolutely love Kenya. I spent months there, 6 months. Absolutely gorgeous. Okay, now Grace is interesting because, and I'm not picking on you, Grace, here, but what is interesting is that as I'm talking to Grace, she's backing away from me. To make the gap between us bigger because she feels uncomfortable close to me, which suggests that her personal territory is quite a large personal bubble around her. Have you felt that about yourself? Do you feel uncomfortable when people get close to you? Probably, yeah. Not some people, of course, because that's quite different. But what we're talking about here is strangers. Now, if in this case, if I was meeting Grace, now when you meet, you want to shake hands with people, you will probably lean out, shake my hand. She will feel comfortable if I shake my hand here. But if I was to come much closer and shake hands, she feels uncomfortable already. She wants to back away a little bit. Which I don't blame her. I'm not going to encroach too much. But for me, that was comfortable. That was a comfortable position. And what happens sometimes, if you notice when you talk to people sometimes, for me in any event, you walk close to somebody and they back away a little bit, and then you keep walking closer, and as you're talking, and then you'll back all around with the room. You know, we could go forever backing away around a room, like playing reverse trains here. So if you meet somebody and they're backing away from you, don't go closer to them. It's just a simple matter that their territorial bubble is a little bit different to yours. That's all. Grace, you can sit down again. Thank you very much. Give her a round of applause for helping us. Thank you. Everybody's different. Culturally, there are all sorts of differences. For a white South African, the territorial bubble will tend to be larger than for a black South African. So if, for instance, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, standing in the queue at the supermarket. Have you had this? And you've got your trolley in front of you, and then a black South African man comes right up behind you. And you feel a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps, because perhaps your territorial bubble is a little bit bigger than his. So you shuffle forward a bit like that. And then he shuffles forward a bit. And then you shuffle a bit more, and then you bounce on the person in front. You know. Then you shuffle, and then you bounce on the person behind you. And you feel uncomfortable. I was standing in a queue, and somebody in the next queue along did this little double shuffle thing. And then she turned around. She said, "Oh, you're so rude," she said. But he's not being rude at all. He's just different. He's got a smaller territorial bubble than she had, and of course he feels much more comfortable close up. So he's just doing what's comfortable and natural for him. Nothing to do with being rude. It's different. And we've got to understand and embrace these differences. I think it's fantastic that we're all different. It'd be really boring if we were all the same. And so long as we understand each other's differences, it makes life just more interesting. So we all have this territorial bubble. Everybody's is a different size. There's a couple of places where that all gets discarded. The most common one is lifts. You know, when you're in a lift, everybody in a lift, they stand perfectly upright, like their hands behind the back, counting the numbers, 17, 16, 15, 14. Because their personal space is invaded now, and they're feeling very uncomfortable. People don't much like getting in and out of lifts because their personal space is invaded. We change. The same is also true on public transport. Where I come from in London, at about 5:30, everybody gets onto the tube. Everybody and their grandmother all piles into the tube. So you're standing there, and everybody's so close to you. Everybody's touching. So your personal space is invaded in that way. But generally, we like to keep our personal space as we like it, and it's different for each group of people. Apply these principles, you're going to improve your ability to do business tenfold. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
you.